بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين لا إله إلا هو صلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين لا إله إلا الله نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستجيره ونستهديه فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونقول داعين الله العلي العظيم اللهم اجعل في صدورنا نورا وفي عقولنا نورا وفي أجسادنا نورا واجعل لنا نور يا رب العالمين. The Prophet ﷺ in so many of the lessons that he imparted to his nation, to his ummah, taught a path of personal integrity, a path of personal integrity and self-respect and dignity and honor, a way of existing in society that is aspirational in nature. Aspirational meaning that it sets as a moral objective a certain type of character and a certain type of ethical order that the individual must, as a Muslim, be endowed with and must seek to fulfill. One of these core lessons, for instance, in a well-known hadith that was reported by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, where he said that he heard the Prophet say, ألا يمنعن رجلا هيبة الناس أن يقول بالحق إذا علموا. Let no person, because of the fear of people, fail to speak the truth. In some of the reported versions of this hadith, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri comments that so many people have failed that test, and he cries. But whether that addition about the companion Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is accurate or not, it is worth reflecting on the moral lesson that the Prophet ﷺ taught. Let no person keep their silence because of the fear of people. The hadith says effectively, not effectively, actually literally, that if you believe you know what the truth is, then you have an obligation to speak it. Speaking the truth means elaborating upon it, expounding it, and also defending your perspective, whatever that perspective is. So there are two core prongs in this one single moral lesson about integrity and dignity. The first prong is the ability to search for, discover, and investigate the truth. The hadith would make absolutely no sense if a Muslim is denied the ability, or if a Muslim denies himself or herself the ability to investigate and to search for the truth. That's the first prong. But the second prong is that once you've become convinced that something is the truth, the Prophet ﷺ says, do not let the fear of others render you silent, make you keep your silence. So the first prong is an obligation to search. The second prong is an obligation to speak. I keep going back again and again to the concept of following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because so many pontificators in the age that we live in pretend that they are Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they are the people of Sunnah. But when you scrutinize what they mean by Sunnah, it turns out that they mean nothing but the most superficial and artificial things. They leave the heart and soul of what the true Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was. They in fact butcher it, ignore it. But what they adhere to are the most artificial things that might have to do with hygiene or appearance or look or affectations. The true Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is a human being that has the ability to search for the truth, and then the ability to speak for the truth. If you do that, you are following the Sunnah of the Prophet. If you don't do that, then you are not following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But think for a second, what is required socially, culturally, politically, to create a social and communal order that enables people to search, to scrutinize, to study the truth. If you really want to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, if searching for the truth is too expensive, then that's an impediment to what the Prophet taught. If searching for the truth will mean that your family will starve to death because you hardly make enough to do anything but earn money to feed your family, then that's a violation of the Sunnah of the Prophet. If searching for the truth is unavailable because you are illiterate, or because the means for education are unavailable, that's a violation of the Sunnah of the Prophet. If searching for the truth is unavailable because you live in a despotic system where you are told the truth is the province of those who rule, while you should concern yourself with your own personal private affairs. When the Prophet ﷺ says, if you become convinced that something is the truth, you have an obligation to speak, and failure to do so is a major problem. We have to think in terms of what conditions are conducive to the fulfillment of that moral command. You can't tell people, busy yourself with the truth or be interested in the truth, if they're too poor, if they're too hungry, if they're too sick, or if searching for the truth means that they can be arrested and thrown in prison and tortured or killed. By definition, if you want to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, by definition, you can't have a tyrannical society. You can't have a culture, a social order, a political order, where the elderly or the aristocracy or the rich or the powerful tell you, obey and don't ask questions. By definition, that's a violation of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because that's not what he did with his people. That's not what he did with his people. He is the Prophet of God ﷺ, and not once in the recorded Sunnah does he tell his followers, you have no right to question my political decisions. In fact, quite the opposite. Time and time again, his economic policies are questioned. His fiscal policies are questioned. His military policies are questioned. His political policies are questioned. And he tolerates all of it. Not once do we have in this huge corpus called the Sunnah and the Hadith, do you have the Prophet ﷺ say, how dare you? When it comes to the Quran, he says, if the Quran tells you something, do it. But if I tell you something about money, about politics, about commerce, about social policies within, and you come and question me, I won't pull rank over you. The Prophet ﷺ was the exact antithesis of something that used to exist in the medieval world and still exists in the Muslim world. That thing is the mystification of power. It used to be that those who ruled would tell those that they ruled over, you are too uneducated, you are too simple-minded, you are too uninspired, ungifted, unlearned to question our decisions in the seat of power, because power is a mysterious thing, and we as rulers have been invited to share in the mystery of power, but you as the laity don't know what the mystery is, so you cannot interfere. A good part of the Islamic Revolution, long before the French Revolution, was the demystification of power. Long before the French Revolution and the English Revolution was the Islamic Revolution that demystified power. When a woman challenged Umar ibn al-Khattab in a mosque over his policies on the payment of dowries, when rebels challenged Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, when so many challenged the Imam Ali tayyibullah tharah, when so many challenged Al-Khalifa Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu over Hurub al-Ridda, in all of these situations, not once did these caliphs respond to the challenge by saying, don't interfere in matters of politics because you are not equipped to interfere in questions of politics. They refused to mystify power. What they said is, we think we're right and we think you're wrong. But that's a world of difference between that and saying power is a mysterious thing given to us by God, you shouldn't meddle with. This is a critical lesson, because if the first prong requires a social order and a political order that allows for the investigation of truth and allows for individual persuasion, the second prong is even more so. I can't tell people you have an obligation to speak the truth and don't let the fear of others silence you. I can't tell them that. If the cost of speaking will mean that they will disappear in prison, or that they're going to be persecuted by the government, or they're going to be tortured or killed, I can't urge people to follow that lesson from the Sunnah if I don't create the conditions that allow for the fulfillment of that lesson. So many who are still under the influence of colonialism love to speak about Oriental despotism and Islamic tyranny. They have the brains of their colonizers. Although they might carry the skin color of the colonized, their intellects, their souls, their conscience is one and the same like their colonizers. If you took just a little bit of reflection, you would recognize that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was not wearing a beard, or wearing a jalabiya, or drinking water in 3 gulps, or cleaning your teeth with miswak, or separating men and women in public gatherings, or this or that of all the nice things that people talk about these days. The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was an investment in the individual. An investment in the individual meant dignity. The dignity that comes with the freedom to investigate the truth and the freedom to speak the truth. But it is entirely meaningless to say, follow the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ if I do not have conditions that are conducive to the fulfillment of that truth. In other words, if ignorance rules, if poverty rules, if political oppression rules, there is no way to fulfill the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ. In the same way that there is no way to fulfill the Quranic command of living by shura. But we'll leave that to another time. Taking our tradition seriously means from the very beginning that you realize it's a tradition that invests in the ethics of the individual. It elevates the individual to heights of karama, of dignity. And immediately realization that there are certain things like the mystification of power that are fundamentally inconsistent with the ethical legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. What do the tyrants of the Muslim world today do? They'll tell you politics and policies are the business of wulat al-umur. You must leave it to wulat al-umur, the rulers. They know what you don't know. They understand what you don't understand. You busy yourself with making your money and feeding your family. If the Emirat builds Bayt Ibrahimi that threatens to change the very nature of Islam and to create a single mesh of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam and call that tolerance, they tell you don't have an opinion about it because it's up to Walat al-Umur. They know best. If the Saudi king buys a yacht or a painting or a chateau in France, they'll tell you, don't talk about it. That's Walat al-Umur. If the traitor of Egypt wastes billions of dollars building a new elite city for the elite of Egypt called the العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة or whatever. They tell you that's the business of ولاة الأمور, don't talk about it. But even in the United States, the entire attitude of the students of Bin Bayya and the Zaytuna people, students of Hamza Yusuf, and if Trump has the Muslim ban, oh, that's Walat al-Umur, Allah's will, don't talk about it. Black Lives Matter, trust the government, Walat al-Umur. You don't understand power, just take care of your family. The medieval paradigm that Islam came as a revolution against has returned. The aristocracy of Mecca, the kuffar of Mecca are back in power, but this time in charge of our very religion. It is as if we have not progressed one iota. The material proof of what I'm talking about. There is a new trend in Saudi, the land of the holy sites. A woman called Aisha al-Muhajiri, a 65-year-old woman in Mecca who does nothing but teach and preach the Quran at her home. She doesn't do anything but teach the Quran at her home. Was arrested, made to disappear, and not only that, but the organization Prisoners of Conscience reports that with this woman, an 80-year-old woman was arrested from Mecca, and that Saudi intelligence has arrested anyone that has inquired about the whereabouts of al-Muhajiri or why she was arrested. And in fact, according to the Prisoners of Conscience, that following these arrests, it was reported that anyone who asks about the detention or charges against al-Muhajiri will face arrest, including her own children. Al-Muhajiri is not the last Quran teacher to be arrested in Saudi. It's not the first, and I'm sure she's not the last. There's a new trend in the land of the holy sites. People who do nothing but teach the Quran at home are picked up and arrested. Consider this alongside of the case of poor Ahmad al-Sabih from Egypt, who I've talked about several times, who still disappeared in Egyptians' political prisons, simply for daring say anything about the Bible, not even politics. Add to this that all the moderate, reform-minded Muslim scholars in a country like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Egypt are all rotting in prison, like Salman al-Auda and so many others, and A'id al-Qarni and Sifr al-Hawali and so many. Where does the mystification of power lie? It is when you try to talk about people like al-Muhajiri, or people like Sifr al-Hawali, or people like Salman al-Auda, or people like Ahmad Sabih, you're told These are political matters. The rulers have their reasons. You can't ask. So you're not allowed to seek the truth because you're not even allowed to know what the charges or what the evidence or any of it is. Just go raise your children. But even if, through your human rights work, for instance, you become convinced of what the truth is, you're told, keep it to yourself. Stay quiet. Now, alongside what you see happening, like the arrests of Quran teachers, people who just did nothing in their life but teach the Quran. Saudi announced that it's going to build the first church in Arabia. The Emirat built the Abrahamic home, which completely dilutes the Islamic faith. Egypt announced just recently, under the directions of the great Egyptian president, that all Quranic references or all Hadith references will be removed from all educational curricula in Egypt starting next year. Starting next year, no Quran references and no references or quotes from the Hadith of the Prophet except in the religion class. And the religion class, it doesn't matter if you pass or fail because it doesn't count towards your GPA. And you are told, when you say, why are you imprisoning Muslim scholars but building a church in Arabia, they tell you, don't ask, none of your business. Why are you removing all Quran references from educational curricula? You're told, don't ask, it's none of your business. Why have you torn down in Egypt hundreds of mosques? Don't ask, it's none of your business. What is happening to the Islamic Ummah? Don't ask, it's none of your business. It's wulatul umur. The mystifications of power is nothing more than the legitimation of tyranny and despotism and degradation and humiliation and the complete eradication of the Prophet's Sunnah. عليه الصلاة والسلام. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم نسأل الله نستشهد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على محمد خاتم النبيين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. It is very simple. Regimes like that, in the one in the Emirat and one in Saudi Arabia and the one in Egypt, know that they have no legitimacy. So why does Saudi Arabia decide to build the first church in Arabia at the same time that they arrest Quran teachers, elderly women teaching from home? Believe it or not, it's because Mohammed bin Salman wants to convince the new administration that, listen, look, yes, I'm a human rights violator, I'm a despot, I'm a tyrant, but look, I am willing to build churches for you. And I know that you fear Islam, and I'm willing to fight Muslims for you. The Emirat Same thing. Muhammad bin Zayed. I am willing to be friends with Israel. I am willing to build a big building and call it the Abrahamic home, and say Islam and Christianity and Judaism is one. So please overlook the fact that I'm murdering people in Yemen and I am imprisoning my own people left and right. Please overlook the fact that I'm a tyrant. Don't you love my Israeli policies? Don't you love the fact that I fight Islam for you? Sisi, exactly the same thing. Listen, yes, I know that you know that I am a tyrant and I maim and torture and kill all the time. But look, I am willing to take Islam out of the heart of people. In this regard, our own politics remains profoundly hypocritical. Why? We have announced to the world years ago, decades ago, that we are a secular society. We built the Western civilization on the profound assumptions that we are not doing the will of God, but the will of the people, by the people, and for the people. One of the first principles of the French Revolution was the strict separation of church and state, which carried over to the American Revolution. But there is one area which remained severely hypocritical. Throughout colonialism, we've tolerated the most tyrannical governors as long as they were willing to tolerate and promote Christianity, or allow Christianity to promote itself. In other words, evangelism and missionary work and the building of churches. While our domestic politics are the byproduct of the French Revolution and the English Reformation, our foreign politics remain thoroughly medievalistic and archaic. So yes, are we willing to tolerate a tyrant like Mohammed bin Salman because he built a church in Arabia? You bet you. Even people in the State Department who've never entered the church in their life, they have this innate sense of victory when they see this type of missionary work take place. We've done the same with Israel. We are willing to tolerate you, the worst of tyrants, the most disgusting human rights abusers on the face of the earth, as long as you make friends with Israel. Sisi slaughters the worst modern civil massacre in the modern age by a local army to its local, against the local population in Rab'a. We're willing to tolerate it as long as he allows Christians to build as many churches as they want, as long as he allows Christian missionaries to come to the country as much as they want, as long as he loves Israel and supports Israel in every way. And so anything he does to his own people is forgivable. Thoroughly hypocritical. A page out of the Crusades. It is as if domestically our intellects have joined the 21st century, but externally, vis-a-vis the Muslim world especially, our intellects remain locked in the medieval age, in the age of crusades and religious wars. So yes, the arrest of the Quran teachers from their homes in Mecca and the building of the church, the first church in Arabia, which is supposedly going to be a huge thing, it's all playing to the West. And Muslims, they get nothing but the mystifications of power. They have no right to either seek al-haq or speak al-haq. Should we care? And again, and I'll say it again and again and again. As long as those who rule over Mecca and Medina are the likes of MBS, Allah will never bless us as a people. As long as Azhar, as a seminary, is in a country ruled by the likes of Sisi, Allah will never bless us as a people. As long as Muslim institutions in the West continue to live oblivious to the dignity of their fellow Muslims around the world, Allah will never bless us as a people. As long as we Muslims in the West continue to care more about whether the hair of a woman under her scarf is showing than whether Salman al-Oda is perishing in prison, Allah will never bless us as a people. As long as we Muslims in the West continue to care more about whether women and men are properly separated and divided in prayer than about the dignity of Muslims around the world, including the genocide in China and the genocide in Burma, Allah will never bless us as a people. The Sunnah of the Prophet is there for all to follow who want to follow it. But it is not about clothes. It is not about hygiene. It is not about looks. It is not about smell. It is not about taste. It's about ethics and dignity and virtue. That's the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. To live in an order and a society where you can investigate the truth, and once you become convinced it is the truth, to be able to speak it without fear of reprisal and punishment. That's the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And until we realize this, Allah will never bless us. Allahumma afu anna. Allahumma aghfir lana. Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada ya Ali ya Azim ya Rahman ya Rahim ya Rabb al-Alameen. Allah forgive our sins. Guide us to the straight path. Endow us with light upon light in our hearts and minds. And help us attain the truth so that we may live in your dignity and beauty until we meet you. Ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa aqim as-salah.